The gentle tap of Emily's white cane against the sidewalk echoed through the quiet suburban streets of Denver. Her measured steps, perfected over years of navigation without sight, carried her confidently toward the local animal shelter. The autumn breeze rustled through nearby trees, bringing with it the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change. At 32, Emily had mastered the art of independence. Her classroom at Wellington Elementary was a testament to her determination, a space where her students learned that limitations were merely challenges waiting to be overcome. Yet despite her professional fulfillment, the empty spaces in her life seemed to grow larger with each passing day. "Welcome to Second Chance Shelter," a warm voice greeted her as the door chimed. "I'm Sarah. How can I help you today?" Emily smiled in the direction of the voice. "Hi, Sarah. I'm Emily Martinez. I called earlier about possibly adopting a guide dog." "Of course, though I should mention, we're not a specialized training facility. Our dogs are wonderful companions, but they haven't received formal guide dog training." Emily nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around her cane. "I understand. I'm open to other possibilities too. Sometimes the best partnerships aren't the ones we plan for." Sarah's footsteps moved closer. "That's a beautiful way to look at it. Would you like to meet some of our dogs?" The shelter's corridor came alive with excited barks and whines as they walked past the kennels. Emily absorbed each sound, creating a mental map of the space. Then something unusual caught her attention, or rather the lack of something. Amidst the cacophony of eager dogs, there was a pocket of silence. "What about that kennel?" Emily asked, pointing toward the quiet space. "The one where there's no barking." Sarah hesitated. "Oh, that's Max. He's a special case, a German Shepherd with a complicated history. We usually don't recommend him for first-time adopters." Emily took a step closer to the kennel. "May I meet him?" "I don't know if that's the best idea. He can be unpredictable, and given your situation..." "My blindness doesn't make me fragile, Sarah," Emily said firmly but kindly. "I'd really like to meet him." The kennel door opened with a metallic click. Emily heard steady breathing and the subtle shift of paws on concrete. No barking, no rushing forward, just watchful silence. "He's looking right at you," Sarah commented, surprise evident in her voice. "He usually turns away from visitors." Emily knelt slowly, extending her hand. "Hello, Max," she said softly. The air shifted as a cold nose touched her fingers, followed by a gentle sniff. Where others might have seen a problematic dog, Emily sensed something deeper, a kindred spirit who knew what it meant to be misunderstood. "May I?" she asked, waiting for Sarah's approval before reaching out to touch Max's fur. Her fingers met thick, well-maintained coat, and beneath it she felt old scars. Max remained perfectly still under her touch, but she could feel his rapid heartbeat. "He's never let anyone touch him this quickly," Sarah whispered. "Usually he growls or backs away." Emily continued her gentle exploration, finding Max's ears, then moving to scratch under his chin. "Everyone has a story," she murmured. "Sometimes we just need someone patient enough to listen." The adoption paperwork was filled with warnings and disclaimers. Sarah's voice carried concern as she listed Max's behavioral issues, anxiety, territorial behavior, unexplained reactions to certain sounds and places, but Emily had already made her decision. She recognized the weight of unspoken stories in Max's silence, and something told her their paths had crossed for a reason. As they prepared to leave the shelter, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple adoption. In the way Max walked beside her, matching her pace perfectly without any training, she sensed the beginning of something extraordinary, and perhaps a little unsettling. What Emily couldn't see was the way Max's eyes darted to every corner, every shadow, as if keeping watch. Nor could she see the small tag hidden beneath his collar, worn smooth by time, bearing a name that wasn't Max at all. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The first week with Max proved to be a delicate dance of trust and boundaries. Emily's modest suburban home, once a quiet sanctuary, now held a new energy, watchful, alert, and somehow both comforting and unsettling. Max's paws made nearly silent patterns across the hardwood floors at night, his vigilant patrol never ceasing, as if guarding against unseen threats. During the day, Emily noticed how Max would position himself between her and the door whenever someone knocked, not with aggression, but with purposeful presence. His behavior suggested training far beyond what a typical shelter dog would possess, yet the shelter had no records of his previous training. "You're quite the mystery, aren't you?" Emily mused one evening, sitting on her porch while Max lay at her feet. The autumn air carried the scent of neighboring fireplaces, and wind chimes tinkled softly in the distance. She had learned to read Max's moods through touch and sound, the subtle shift of his weight, the rhythm of his breathing, the almost imperceptible rumble in his throat when something caught his attention. That night, as rain began to fall, Max's behavior changed dramatically. The steady drumming of raindrops against windows was interrupted by his low growl, not his usual cautionary sound, but something deeper, more primal. Emily sat up in bed, alert. "What is it, boy?" Max's nails clicked rapidly across the floor as he moved from window to window. Emily followed him, her hand trailing along the wall for guidance. When she reached the living room, the cool air hitting her face told her something was wrong before she could process why. "Max?" she called softly. The window was open, the one she was certain she'd closed before bed. Water from the rain had dampened the carpet beneath it, and a musty breeze carried unfamiliar scents into her home. Max pressed against her leg, his body tense but protective. The next morning, Emily called her neighbor, Grace, to check the property. "There are footprints in the mud near your window," Grace reported, her voice tight with concern. "Emily, maybe you should call the police." But Emily hesitated. Something about this felt personal, connected to Max in ways she couldn't explain. Instead of calling the authorities, she returned to the shelter, hoping to learn more about Max's history. Sarah, the shelter worker, seemed nervous when Emily asked for more details about Max's arrival. "The records are incomplete," she admitted. "He was brought in by a man who said he found him wandering near Table Mountain. But what?" The man was nervous, almost guilty. And Max? Max never acted like a stray. He had commands, training. Sometimes I wonder if the man who brought him in was actually his owner. That afternoon, Max led Emily to the backyard with unusual urgency. His pattern of movement was different, purposeful rather than his usual protective circling. Emily heard him digging, his powerful paws moving earth with determination. "Max, what have you found?" She carefully made her way toward the sound. Kneeling in the grass, her fingers found the freshly disturbed soil, and then something solid. A metal collar, old and weathered, with a strange emblem she could feel etched into its surface. The moment she touched it, Max let out a sound she had never heard before. Not quite a whimper, not quite a growl. When she reached for him, she felt tremors running through his body. That night, the rain returned, harder this time. Through the darkness, Emily heard something that made her blood run cold. The distinct sound of someone trying her back door handle. But before she could react, Max was already there, his powerful form positioned between her and the door, waiting in absolute silence for whatever lay on the other side. Chapter 3. Echoes of Truth. The morning light filtered through Emily's kitchen window, casting warmth on her face as she sat at her table, turning the old metal collar over in her hands. Her fingers traced the emblem again and again, trying to decipher its meaning. The metal was high quality, not the kind typically used for pet accessories, and the emblem felt official, like a badge or insignia. "What's your real story, Max?" she whispered. The German shepherd lay at her feet, his steady breathing occasionally interrupted by small whines whenever her fingers passed over certain parts of the collar. A knock at the door made them both tense. Max rose silently, but Emily sensed no alarm in his posture as she touched his back. "Coming," she called, making her way to the door with practiced ease. "Emily, it's Grace from next door. There's someone here you might want to talk to." She opened the door, feeling Max press against her leg, alert but not aggressive. "Good morning, Grace. Who's with you?" "Name's Robert Chen," a male voice answered. Professional, measured. "I'm a retired K9 handler. Grace mentioned you found something interesting in your yard yesterday." Emily's fingers instinctively tightened around the collar she still held. "Would you like to come in, Mr. Chen?" Over coffee, Robert examined the collar while Emily listened to his every movement, every small intake of breath. Max remained unusually calm in the presence of this stranger, though he never left Emily's side. "This is military-grade equipment," Robert finally said, his voice carrying a weight that made Emily lean forward. "Special Forces K9 unit, to be specific. These aren't available to the public, and they stopped using this particular design about 3 years ago." Emily's heart raced. "Are you saying Max was a military dog?" "This collar suggests he was. The emblem here? It's from an elite unit that specializes in complex operations. But what's strange is that military dogs aren't just given up for adoption without extensive documentation. Their retirements are carefully managed." Grace, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Could he have been stolen?" "It's complicated," Robert replied carefully. "These dogs are considered sensitive military assets. If one went missing, there would be an extensive search." He paused, and Emily heard him shift in his chair. "May I ask where you got him?" Emily recounted her experience at the shelter, including Sarah's description of the nervous man who'd brought Max in. As she spoke, she felt Max's head lift from its resting position on her foot, his attention sharp and focused. "There's something else," Emily added, describing the previous night's attempted intrusion and the footprints Grace had found. "It's like someone's watching us." Robert was silent for a long moment. "Emily, these dogs are trained to protect classified information. Some can even recognize specific sounds or signals that might mean nothing to civilians. If Max was involved in sensitive operations..." A sudden crash from outside cut through the conversation. Max was on his feet instantly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Grace gasped, and Emily heard Robert stand quickly. "Someone just ran from behind your garden shed," Grace whispered. "They were watching us through the window." Robert moved toward the door, but Max was faster. Before anyone could react, he was out through the dog door, his powerful stride carrying him into the yard. Emily heard the fence gate slam, followed by running footsteps and the screech of car tires. When Max returned minutes later, he carried something in his mouth, a torn piece of fabric that, when Robert examined it, revealed a partial embroidered insignia matching the one on the collar. That evening, after her visitors had left, Emily sat with Max in her living room, her hand resting on his head. The piece of fabric and collar lay on her coffee table, physical links to a past that seemed to grow more complex by the day. As if sensing her thoughts, Max shifted closer, resting his chin on her knee. "Don't worry," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're protecting, you're not alone anymore." But even as she spoke those reassuring words, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were both now part of something far larger and more dangerous than she could imagine. Chapter 4. Hidden Frequencies. Emily's fingers flew across the braille display of her laptop as she researched military K9 units, her mind racing with possibilities. Max lay nearby, his breathing steady but alert. The events of the past few days had transformed her quiet suburban life into something that felt like it belonged in a classified document. The doorbell chimed, making Max lift his head but not bark. A sign Emily had learned meant the visitor was familiar. "Emily!" "It's Sarah from the shelter," a voice called through the door. Emily welcomed her in, noting the tension in Sarah's voice. "I had to come," Sarah said, settling into the offered chair. "After you asked about Max's records, I did some digging. The man who brought him in, he came back to the shelter yesterday, asking questions about who adopted Max." Max's nails clicked against the hardwood as he moved closer to Emily, and she felt his body press against her legs. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Sarah assured her. "But Emily, he had military identification. He said he was authorized to retrieve Max for national security reasons. When I refused to give any information without proper documentation, he..." Sarah's voice trembled. "He implied there could be consequences." Emily reached down to touch Max's head, finding his ears alert and forward. "Did he leave a name?" "Colonel James Harrison. I wrote it down after he left." There was a rustling of paper. "But here's the strange part. I called a friend who works with military dogs. She said there's no Colonel Harrison listed in any K9 unit." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Emily was about to respond when Max suddenly stiffened. A second later, her radio, which had been playing soft classical music in the background, shifted to a different frequency. Through the static, a series of rhythmic beeps emerged. Max's reaction was immediate and extraordinary. He moved to the center of the room and sat perfectly still, as if waiting. Then, to both women's astonishment, he began to respond to the beeps with soft whines in a distinct pattern. "Emily," Sarah whispered, It's like he's answering the signal." The radio static continued for another minute before returning to classical music. Max remained in position for several more seconds before relaxing, but Emily could feel him trembling when she reached out to touch him. That night, after Sarah left, Emily called Robert Chen. His response to her description of Max's behavior was grave. "There are specialized military frequencies used for covert communication," he explained. "Some K9s are trained to respond to specific patterns. Emily, if Max is reacting to these signals, he might have been part of something highly classified." "But why abandon him at a shelter?" Emily wondered aloud. "And why try to get him back now?" "Unless," Robert paused, "unless he wasn't supposed to be at the shelter in the first place. Some dogs are trained to retain sensitive information, routes, locations, even recognition patterns for specific individuals. If Max was part of a covert operation..." A sharp knock at Emily's door cut through their conversation. Max's growl was immediate and fierce, unlike anything she had heard from him before. "Someone's here," Emily whispered into the phone. "Don't answer it," Robert commanded. "I'm on my way. Call the police if..." The line went dead. At the same moment, Emily's power cut out, plunging the house into darkness. Not that it affected her vision, but the sudden silence of her electronic devices was deafening. Through it all, Max's growl continued, low and warning. Then Emily heard it. The subtle sound of someone trying to bypass her back door lock. Max's muscles bunched under her hand, ready, but waiting. In the distance, a car engine started, then another. They were surrounded. Emily's hand found the military collar on her side table, her fingers tracing the emblem one more time. In that moment, she made a decision. Whatever Max was protecting, whoever was after him, she would protect him just as fiercely as he had been protecting her. She leaned down to whisper in his ear, "We're in this together, boy. Show me what to do." As if understanding, Max nudged her hand toward her phone, the one device still working on its battery power. His nose pressed specifically against the emergency contact button where she had programmed Robert's number. Chapter 5. The Protector's Code. Emily's fingers moved swiftly across her phone's screen, muscle memory guiding her to Robert's contact. Max remained vigilant beside her, his body tense but controlled. The sounds of movement outside her house grew more distinct, multiple sets of footsteps coordinating their approach. Robert answered on the first ring. "Emily, stay where you are. I'm 4 minutes out and I've contacted some old colleagues. Whatever you do, don't let them take Max. A new sound cut through the darkness, a high-pitched tone just at the edge of Emily's hearing. Max's reaction was immediate. He pressed against her legs, guiding her away from the doors and windows toward the hallway leading to her basement. They're using sonic devices. Robert's voice crackled through the phone. Military grade. Max is trying to protect you from the effects. Emily, you need to trust him completely right now. She did. Letting Max guide her, Emily followed his movements down the basement stairs. The concrete walls seemed to dampen the high-pitched sound, and Max's urgency lessened slightly. In the darkness of her basement, Emily felt oddly calm. This space she knew by heart, every corner, every object's location. Robert, she whispered into the phone, Max isn't just a military dog, is he? This is about more than classified information. No, Robert confirmed, the sound of his car engine racing in the background. I made some calls after our last conversation. Max, or as he was known in service, Echo, was part of Project Guardian. It's a classified program that trained dogs to recognize and respond to specific neural patterns. They can detect intentions, Emily. Not just physical threats, but psychological ones. They know who can be trusted. The revelation struck Emily like a physical force. All of Max's behaviors, his immediate trust in her at the shelter, his constant vigilance, his ability to guide her despite no formal training, suddenly made sense. He hadn't just been protecting her. He'd been reading everyone around them, identifying threats and allies. Above, footsteps moved across her first floor. Emily heard her front door's lock click open, followed by the subtle shuffle of multiple people entering her home. Max's breathing remained steady, but she felt his muscles coil with purpose. The man who brought Max to the shelter, Emily whispered into the phone. He wasn't trying to save him from something, was he? Max was protecting him from something. We think he was the project's lead scientist, Robert confirmed. Dr. Marcus Reed. He disappeared 3 months ago, right after reporting ethical concerns about how Project Guardian was being used. Max was his personal research subject, the most successful of the program. When Dr. Reed vanished, Max did too. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open. The high-pitched tone intensified, but Max stood his ground, positioning himself between Emily and the stairs. His body language changed, not aggressive but resolute. They're not here to hurt us, are they? Emily realized, her hand buried in Max's fur. They're here because Max knows something about what happened to Dr. Reed. The basement lights suddenly flickered on. Someone had restored the power. Footsteps descended the stairs, measured and deliberate. Emily felt Max shift, not in fear or aggression, but in recognition. Hello, Emily, a familiar voice called out, one she'd heard before at the shelter. I'm Dr. Reed. I believe you've been taking care of my friend Echo. Max's tail moved slightly, acknowledging the voice, but he didn't leave Emily's side. In that moment, she understood. Max hadn't just been hiding from his past. He'd been waiting, watching, choosing who to trust with whatever knowledge he carried. They're right behind me, Dr. Reed continued, his voice tight with urgency. Echo knows what they did, what they're planning to do with the program. He's been waiting for the right person, someone who could understand what it means to see the world differently, someone who could help us expose the truth. Emily straightened, her hand firm on Max's shoulder. Everything, the midnight patrols, the buried collar, the response to specific frequencies, had been leading to this moment. Then let's make sure his trust wasn't misplaced, she said, just as the sound of screeching tires and shouting voices erupted from above. Chapter 6. A Vision of Truth. The basement erupted into chaos as Robert's voice boomed from above, accompanied by the sound of multiple people entering the house. Federal agents! Stand down! Emily felt Max, Echo, press against her legs. His body relaxed despite the commotion. Dr. Reed moved closer, his breathing quick but controlled. Echo knows we can trust them, he said softly. He always knew who to trust. Heavy footsteps thundered down the basement stairs, but Echo remained calm. Emily heard Robert's familiar voice. Area secured. Doctor. Reed, you and your evidence are now under federal protection. Evidence? Emily asked, her hand still resting on Echo's fur. Everything they need is right here, Dr. Reed explained, kneeling beside Echo. Emily heard the subtle sound of Velcro being pulled apart, followed by a metallic click. His collar, the real one, not the one they planted in your yard, contains a chip with everything I documented about Project Guardian's illegal operations. Echo protected it all this time, waiting for the right moment, the right people. That's why you left him at the shelter, Emily realized. You knew they'd be looking for him with you. Yes, Doctor. Reed's voice carried both pride and sadness. Echo's ability to read people made him the perfect guardian for the information. He could sense who could be trusted. When he chose you, Emily, he didn't just find a safe haven. He found someone who understood what it meant to see the world differently. Robert's footsteps approached. The tactical team has apprehended Colonel Harrison and his operatives. They've been trying to recover Echo and the evidence for months. Doctor. Reed's documentation proves they were planning to use Project Guardian's research for psychological manipulation, using trained dogs to identify and exploit human vulnerabilities. Emily knelt beside Echo, wrapping her arms around his powerful neck. He leaned into her embrace, his steady heartbeat a familiar comfort. But they didn't count on a dog's capacity for loyalty and love being stronger than their conditioning, she said softly. That's what I discovered, Dr. Reed agreed. The more we develop their ability to read human intentions, the more they develop their own moral compass. Echo didn't just learn to detect threats, he learned to protect what was right. The next few hours passed in a blur of official statements and debriefings. Emily sat through it all with Echo by her side, his presence a constant anchor as federal agents documented everything. She learned that Robert had been part of a task force investigating Project Guardian, and that Echo's response to the radio frequencies had been a coded signal they'd been waiting for. As dawn approached, Emily sat on her front porch with Echo, the morning air crisp and clean after the night's events. Dr. Reed and Robert were inside, finalizing paperwork with the federal agents. Ms. Martinez? Dr. Reed's voice came from the doorway. There's one more thing we need to discuss. Emily's heart clenched as she tightened her hold on Echo's fur. This was it, the moment they'd take him away. Echo's official military service is over, Dr. Reed continued, his voice gentle. He's completed his mission. Now he needs a home, a real one, given your unique bond. Well, I can't think of anyone better suited to be his permanent family. Echo's tail thumped against the porch, and Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. You mean, he chose you, Emily, Robert added warmly. And after seeing you two together, it's clear why. You both see the world in extraordinary ways. Echo pressed his head against Emily's hand, and she smiled through her tears. In the distance, birds began their morning songs, and the first rays of sun warmed her face. Her world had changed dramatically in the past weeks, but as she sat there with Echo, her protector, her friend, she knew they had both finally found what they'd been searching for, someone who could see past the surface to the truth that lay beneath. End of story. Dear readers, we hope Emily and Echo's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come from seeing the world differently, and that true loyalty knows no bounds. If this tale of trust, courage, and unconditional love has moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming stories that explore the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these special stories to life. Until our next adventure, remember that sometimes the best way to see the truth is through the heart.